Welcome to Battleground Politics. I'm Lauren Make. If you're a registered Democrat or Republican in Pennsylvania, you'll get to vote in this month's primary elections. If you're an independent, though, not affiliated with a party, it's a different story. You won't get a say until November. Today, we're going to talk about a push that is underway to change that. Let's start by taking a look at where things are now, how voters are registered in Pennsylvania. We pulled these numbers as of April 1st. The Commonwealth has more than 3.8 million Democrats and more than 3.4 million registered Republicans. And there are a little under 1 million voters with no party affiliation. My guest today is David Thornburg, the former head of the Committee of 70. He is now the chair of Ballot PA, a campaign that was started by the Committee of 70, which is urging a change that would let independents vote in Pennsylvania's primaries. He joins me now to discuss. David, great to see you.
Nice to see you, Lauren, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It has been a while, by the way. It's good to have you here. So let's talk about Ballot PA and this campaign that you're involved with now. First of all, what's behind this? Why is this something that you wanted to get involved in?
Well, let's start with a couple significant facts. People in Pennsylvania don't realize this, but we're one of only 7 states that hasn't figured out a way to include independent voters in primaries. So we're different, and I would argue that's bad. By our numbers, we actually have about 1.2 million. There's some little noise around the numbers, but it's a significant number. It's also the fastest growing segment of the electorate. Young people, close to 2/3 of young people are now choosing not to identify with the Democratic Republican Party. So if we care about the future of our democracy, we should pay attention to that. Here's another thing that really jumped out at me. 1 in 2 veterans consider themselves political independents. So if you're a veteran, you come back to Pennsylvania after serving your country, putting your life on the line for your country, we're telling you, if you're an independent, you can't vote in primaries, even for your own commander-in-chief. So to me, that's just sort of established as the baseline. We have to change. It's time for Pennsylvania. We don't want to be the last to recognize that independent voters should have a voice.
Yeah, and different states do this in different ways, and we can talk about that. But this is a conversation that has been going on for quite a while in Pennsylvania. There have been various proposals to make changes. We've seen Republicans push for it. We've seen Democrats push for it. Certainly, we've seen independents push for it. Is there anything about this moment now that tells you that it's ripe for a change, that it actually might go through this time?
Sure. And just to fill in a little bit, I mean, there have been bills introduced in Harrisburg since at least the mid-90s to make this change. And all kinds of folks. Our Attorney General candidate Eugene De Pasquale introduced a bill in the 2009 to make this change. Jared Solomon, one of his opponents, has also supported this. Josh Shapiro, when he was in the legislature, supported that proposal. So has a long history. I would argue that this is the time to do this. It makes sense politically, and it makes sense in terms of expanding the electorate that makes these critical decisions. And here's why. No news to you, we live in fiercely partisan political times. The level of acrimony that's out there, most of which is talking trash about the other team, is just intolerable. And I think people have had it with that.
So, do you think this would change that, though?
But here's why. If you look at how people get elected in Pennsylvania and other places, the primary electorate is critical. I mentioned to you earlier, we look back 20 years at legislative races in Pennsylvania. Only 10% of those are decided in the general election, meaning 90% are essentially decided in the primary. Who votes in primaries? The rabid base of each party, extreme right, extreme left. So when those folks show up, and not many of them do, as you know, I mean, primary turnout is pathetic. When those folks show up, that produces candidates who represent the voters that voted for them, extreme right, extreme left. What we end up with is dysfunction, acrimony, did to, did not, in Harrisburg, in counties, in Washington. So I think this is one way, one critical way to move past that dysfunctional dynamic.
So is the argument that it will change the conversation and change the types of candidates who are successful, or is the argument participation?
It's both. There's a level of fairness about this. We point out that we all pay for primary elections. It's about $75 million a year. But for over 1 million voters who pay for these elections, they can't participate in the elections that they pay for. Sounds like more than one person says taxation without representation. But I think I'm also convinced, and we've looked at lots of other states, that this would fundamentally change the incentives to govern, and to govern from the center out and not the extremes in. Because frankly, when we are left with the extremes, we just throw things at each other and get nothing done, and everybody's pissed in the process. So we've got to do something to move towards between the 40-yard lines of the football field, and I would suggest this is one of the things we ought to do. If
this is something that you think could change the kinds of candidates who are successful in this moment where things are so divisive, could you maybe end up with more pushback because you have more people on the extremes of both of the parties who might say, hey, I don't want that?
There's definitely like a paddle wheel that we have to go through here. But I believe, and I've lived in Pennsylvania and participated in politics most of my life, I believe that the people of Pennsylvania, I used this reference earlier, politically live between the 40-yard lines of the football field. This is not an extreme state. I think if you look at the candidates who have been elected over the years, certainly statewide, that's reflected. It's true, I think, at the local levels as well over the long term. So I think folks are yearning for the kind of results-oriented, problem-solving government that we yearn for, and I think this is one way to move towards that in that direction. I would also say politically, I think both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, maybe less so the Republican Party right now, realizes that they can't win general elections by just playing to the cheap seats of the extreme. They can't do that. The math doesn't work. The last two Republican candidates for governor have failed disastrously. You lose by 20 points. That's just a crushing defeat. There's not enough extreme voters. So you've got to play towards the center, and if you believe that, then you support this proposal, because this will bring into the process over 1 million less partisan voters, and you can make that work for you politically.
There certainly is the argument that you could just register as a Democrat or a Republican to vote in that primary. Certainly, we see people doing that in Philadelphia who may consider themselves to be more independents, but because it is a city where it is so heavily Democratic, people will register as a Democrat just so that they can vote in the mayoral primary, for example. Yep. What is wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, because this is all public record, you could look up my voting record, and I've done that. I've been a Republican, I've been a Democrat, I've been an independent, I have to switch and so forth and so on. But I found myself thinking, why do I have to do this? I have a busy life like everybody else. You got to keep track of family and job and, et cetera, et cetera. So why should there be an extra burden on someone who chooses to be an independent to keep track of deadlines, to switch back and forth, et cetera? Another line, someone said to me that, acting that way is a little bit like changing your religion to take advantage of the upcoming holidays, right? You think like, I always liked that Hanukkah thing. I think I'll be Jewish for a while, or I'd really like to celebrate Easter, so now I'll become a Christian. So it's not sincere. And again, why are we asking people to do that? Is there some, this is at a time, I mentioned young people, there's a time when a lot of folks are questioning the dominance of parties in the process. So it's hard to say with a straight face that you got to suck it up and do all this stuff just to honor the grand tradition of the two-party system. When I think if you ask the American people, you get strong negatives about the two-party system. So,
and as if you look in Philadelphia right now, we've had a third party be fairly successful with two members on council.
And here's the kicker too. the number of independent voters in Philadelphia now far exceeds that of the Republicans. And by the way, has doubled in the last 20 years, just here in Philadelphia. And why is that? A lot of it is young people. And that to me is, I started out my career long ago as a civics teacher, social studies and civics. And you do that because you believe in the power of young people to inherit this democracy and make it better. And why would we be doing this, excluding independent young voters from the polls, if we actually believed in just what I said? So there's so many reasons why I think we've been on the wrong course for a long time, and I don't want to be the last state to change.
There is a proposal out right now. I actually spoke recently with House Speaker Joanna McClinton about it, that would create same-day registration in Pennsylvania, which could allow people potentially, depending on how it's written, could potentially allow people to switch their party on the day of the election. Would something like that, if it were implemented in Pennsylvania, would that solve the issue? If people could just go and do it that day, they wouldn't have to decide which party 2 weeks before when the voter registration deadline. They could just say, hey, I want to vote in this one. I'm going to go and do it that day. Does that solve the problem?
I'll give you credit. You're very astute in picking up on that, because that occurred to me as well. The trick is, if I'm an independent right now, if I were to do that and I show up at the polls and I say, you know what, today I'll be a Republican because I want to vote in the Republican primary. I don't want to have that enroll me in the Republican Party going forward. So if it's essentially like a temporary, registration, one day only, that allows me to vote in the primaries, then sure, that would solve the problem. I mean, there's lots of ways to solve the problem. We forget there are many states, Virginia is one of them, that don't require people to register by party. So there you go. You just show up at the polls, you pick the party primary you want to participate in, and off you go.
There are also other states that do it all different ways. Open primaries, closed primaries, partially open primaries. There's also states that do it where they just put everybody on the ballot, and then the top two go to a general election. Do you think something like that would work in Pennsylvania?
Well, look, you take the long view. I mean, party primaries have only been around for about 100 years, originated in Pennsylvania, by the way. And, the thinking at the time was that the party bosses, the old backroom cigar-smoking party bosses, had too much influence over candidate selection. So let's democratize it. Let's let everybody in. Let's let the voters vote. 100 years later, the party bosses have been replaced by the party bases. What I said earlier, we've got these extreme bases who are deciding who gets to go on to the general and get elected. So I think it's time for a change. There's been probably more movement around this issue in the last 10 years around the country than for the past 50 years. So the time is right. And I think in honor of those 1.2 million voters and a better system, a better way to govern, I think this is the time for Pennsylvania to move forward. And I want to talk about, this is not just a pipe dream. There's legislation in play, and we got to get that done.
Yeah, there are a number of proposals that have been bubbling up around the way elections are run in Pennsylvania. We can expect to hear more about that over the next year, really. I mean, Democrats have proposals, Republicans have proposals regarding voter ID and a potential constitutional amendment. In terms of the way the sausage is made, do you see a possibility of something like this being tucked into one of those bills?
Yeah. Well, I've always believed the most powerful way to get things done in a legislative body is you work out a deal. You work out a package. You get something, I get something, we're both good. I mean, that's common sense, but that's the way the system is designed. Also recognize that the majorities in both the Pennsylvania House and Senate are so slim, you can't just win stuff on the floor on a party line vote. So I think that's the most likely scenario. And I think what you mentioned earlier about Speaker McClinton's bill, there's some other bills, the voter ID, all of this stuff is sort of a game for these kinds of discussions that could come together in a nice little package that if it gets too big, they talk about it becomes like a Christmas tree with too many ornaments on it, falls over. But I think if there's a defined number of things that both parties feel good about, that also sort of run in the same direction to achieve the desired results, I think that could happen. And by the way, we're past the point where any of these proposals would affect directly the 24 election. So put that behind you. It's not like, next week we're going to roll out this new proposal, right?
Yeah.
It'll be 25, could be 26. I don't care. But I think that's very productive thinking. And good legislators understand that. You don't get everything. It's like, with your kids, like, you don't get everything. But this is territory that we'll be working.
One of the things that that you have done is get some of the former governors involved, which is interesting. It's an interesting group of them to back this idea. How did that come about?
We asked them. And I should say, we have all of them, all the former governors.
So tell me, who's
So
on
this
letter?
is Governor Corbett, Governor Wolf, Governor Rendell, Governor Ridge, and Governor Schweiker. So you have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
Who was the toughest sell?
Honestly, none of them. I mean, this was a phone call or an email. And here's the way I make sense of it. These folks had to govern, right? And what we said earlier, you have to govern from the middle. You have to broker deals and compromises. I think all of these folks are frustrated with the current state of affairs and see this as a way to free up some of the log jams and get stuff done. So there's no arm twisting, there was no whatever. I mean, it was nearly instantaneous. And I should say there's a list of probably 30 other significant lawmakers, former members of Congress. Folks may know in the region the name Charlie Dent, who served admirably from the Lehigh Valley as a Republican. Current Congressman Brendan Boyle and Mike Fitzpatrick are both supporters. Brian Fitzpatrick are supporters. So to my mind, what that says is folks who have been in the hot seat of governing understand that something's broken, we got to fix it, and this is one thing that could help.
So what are the next steps for you on this? What's ahead?
Well, they say in Harrisburg there's a magic number to get stuff done. You need 102 votes in the House, 26 votes in the Senate, and 1 governor's signature. The good news is there are bills actively being considered in both the House and the Senate. And it's important to note there's bipartisan support. There's bipartisan leadership for both. The bills in the House are probably a little far ahead because they were voted out of committee, which means the only thing between those bills and those moving to the next chamber is they have to get a vote on the floor of the House. So we're pushing hard right now with all concern to get that done. We have a big rally coming up April 11th and are mobilizing independent voters and supporters to add their voice. Ballotpa.org is the website if folks want to learn more. But this is not like beer talk. There are real bills with real people, real legislative champions who are supporting this. And I remain optimistic that we can get this done.
You made the point that this is not something that would go into effect for the 2024 election, even if it does get through, just because of the timing.
Exactly.
The fact that it is an election year, though, and a big presidential election year, does that help at all? Does it hinder doing something like this?
Well, absolutely. For better, for worse, people pay more attention to politics in presidential years than not.
People are focused on it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we've been trying to make clear is that independent voters are up for grabs. They will determine who wins Pennsylvania in the presidential race. I guarantee you that. They will probably determine who is in the majority and who's in the minority in both the Pennsylvania House and Senate. So anybody who's got a dog in that fight, if you're a candidate or supporter of a candidate, you ought to be looking at independent voters as another way to win. And if you're going to recognize that, then you have to support this proposal to make independent voters full participants in the democratic process.
All right, David Thornburg, thanks so much for your time. Enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Lauren.
We reached out to both the Democratic and Republican parties in Pennsylvania for reaction to this idea to open up Pennsylvania's primaries. As of the time of this taping, we have not gotten a response from either one. You can find more Battleground Politics on our website, NBCPhiladelphia.com/battlegroundpolitics, or wherever you get your podcasts.